Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:08 p.m. in Central Europe, and welcome everybody who has joined me. It's getting. I hardly need to tell you, it's pitch black outside. The grim days are now becoming palpable. But anyway, I'm very happy, however, that Gagglers have joined me. And of course, today's a big day because in just a few hours, actually, it's not really it's going to be quite a number of hours because Trump will be speaking. He will be accepting the nomination. By the way, I want to say I've got a new light here, and I'm not actually sure how much better this light is. I got to at least take this light out so that it's not in the horizon. But I had a number of complaints that that there wasn't enough light and that I was in pitch black. And so I decided to invest in a new lamp, and I'm still not sure whether it's any better than it was. But anyway, but maybe it's a little bit brighter. But anyway, Justin Maverick says, "Good day, George. Good day. Good. Where are you?" But anyway, at 9 p.m. local time, and you're out of focus. I thought that out of focus, but I don't know what I can do about the focus part. But it does. But I kind of agree that the focus isn't better. My Rumble account says it looks better. Well, that's the main thing. I mean, I invested some money in it, not a huge amount, but I did invest some money, and this is significantly better. Okay, well, I'm good. People are finding it hard, so maybe are finding it better. Maybe I'll get another lamp, so I have one lamp on one side, another lamp on the other side, and then I'll get a really, really bright, situation. But anyway, so at 9 p.m. Central Time, Trump will speak. He will accept the nomination of the GOP. So that's 9 p.m. Central Time. So it's 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and it'll be 4 a.m. My time. However, I want to have a live chat. So I'm going to see we can have a live chat on the Gaggle so that everyone can join in and then present their commentary about what they think of Trump's speech. Now, I don't know whether people watched the speech delivered by J.D. Vance yesterday. I thought it was quite a remarkable performance, not just because of the content of his speech. I mean, he was, abandoning that whole, obviously, Reaganite foreign policy, but also abandoning the Reaganite domestic policy agenda. He was attacking corporations. He was celebrating workers. There was nothing there about tax cuts. It's about protecting American jobs. So I think that was a remarkable speech by a vice president, and particularly striking afterwards was when you saw his family came along and joined him, and it was a very different kind of family from the usual kind of waspy families that that go on the GOP platform. I mean, I don't know who these relatives were, but they all looked. This was very much a blue collar America. I mean, that was just there was somebody there with covered in tattoos, a woman. Again, always striking. It's a woman covered in tattoos, and it was very much a kind of a sight of blue collar America, and very much the message he was presenting, that we're the party of blue collar America, and that really is quite a big deal. And that's why I thought it was it was like a historic event. It was also a good speech. It was a well written speech. It was quite witty, quite entertaining, and yeah, I mean, but this transformation of the GOP is interesting, because up until the nomination of Vance, you've had the people like Ted Cruz saying, yeah, we're the party of working Americans, we're now the blue collar party, and so on. But that's fine, that's great, as something you say at a party rally. But you've got to actually deliver. You've got to actually pursue policies that that do appeal to blue collar Americans. And I'm not at all sure that Ted Cruz does that. So, but Vance clearly does. I mean, Vance clearly does talk about protecting working people and protecting them against the depredations of corporate America. He's against he's against monopolies. He's wants tariffs. It's very interesting. And basically, the whole, we don't want no wars. We don't want to spend any more money on stupid wars. We got to concern ourselves with Americans. So I thought that was very interesting, and as I say, it was quite historic. And then with the family, I mean, I couldn't figure out which one was his mother, but they definitely were not the usual kind of, the blue-rinsed Republican women that you'd used to. I mean, you go back to the Reagan era, and the kind of women that would come on, they would sort of look a little like Nancy Reagan, always very, very nicely turned out, and so on. This was very, very different. So that'll be interesting. Then again, it'll be interesting what Trump will say today. I mean, will he deliver his familiar bromides? Hey, everything was great under me. Or will he get a little more specific? I mean, is he actually really going to explain what, for instance, like his foreign policy agenda? How is he going to bring this war in Ukraine to an end? I mean, is he serious about it, or is this just something something nice to say at campaign rallies? So I think it'll be interesting, and really in the aftermath of what happened on Saturday, I think there'll be even more attention devoted to his speech, because the more we read about what happened, first of all, it really was just a few millimeters away. I mean, the guy got shots in. I mean, he killed someone. You just hear it. It just, when you listen to them, with obviously enhanced by audio, you actually hear, pow, 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 8 shots. And the one that it grazed his ear. I mean, it was just a few millimeters, and he would have been dead. He and behaved in that extraordinary way. And then, of course, there's going to be real issues about Homeland Security, Secret Service, the FBI. Why exactly were they so lackadaisical? Why couldn't they be bothered to do anything for Trump? I mean, there was so many warnings about this guy on the roof. I mean, he'd been spotted earlier in the day. He'd been photographed. He had already been in the sights of the snipers. People were screaming, there's someone on the roof. He's got a gun. I mean, and then the question of why wasn't this obvious um, set place secured by the Secret Service? I mean, it was just so obvious. It was right in the line of fire from there. So those really, given all of that, I think it's going to be it'll be quite a portentous a speech, which was not the case, I think, in 2020. 2016 was quite interesting. I mean, the one that he gave then was, again, quite unusual and a very kind of a dark view of America, which he then abandoned once he became president. And then it all became, that as soon as he took his hand off the Bible, it was suddenly morning in America and everything is going fantastically. So, we'll see that. Now, the other question is, what happens to Biden in the meantime? Because the media are now speculating that Biden could be out really by the end of the week. I'm not buying it, but that's the story that's coming out of Axios, New York Times, Washington Post are suggesting that the pressure is growing on Biden to drop out, and it's possible that he's suddenly succumbing to COVID may be preliminary to his dropping out. I mean, that could be if he says, "Hey, I've got COVID, and there are complications from COVID, and therefore I can't campaign." I mean, that could be. I'm still skeptical because I think there is no mechanism in place to get Biden out. I mean, he's won these delegates. The delegates are pledged to him, and I haven't read anywhere anyone who's explained the kind of a legal process whereby you can actually prize away delegates that are pledged to a candidate. And if he doesn't want to go, he's not going to go. I mean, he can step aside. That's a different matter. But if he stays in, those delegates are pledged to him, and they're not. They can't be taken away from him. And so I think the odds still have to be that he will stay, even though we're reading all about these noises in the background. Obama seems to be playing a role here, even though he hasn't said anything explicitly other than, hey, it's Joe's decision to make. Pelosi seems to be doing something in the background. Hakeem Jeffries doing something in the background. The difficulty they all have, of course, is that if they push aside Biden, they're stuck with Harris. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I mean, there's no choice. If Biden goes, Harris steps in. I mean, there's just you can't just simply go, oh, we'll have an open convention and then we'll nominate Gavin Newsom. It's not going to work like that. I think the way to work is Biden steps aside, maybe even resigns the presidency, and then Harris steps in. There's just it's not going to happen. Harris will not be pushed aside, and that's really Biden's calling card, which is that, well, you don't have any candidate, any alternative to me who is likely to fare better against Trump. And he says, look, I beat him in 2020. I did it. Now, maybe the Democrats deep down don't believe that he beat Trump in 2020. That's an awkward one. And they obviously don't want to go there because that's going to raise all sorts of issues if they think, well, I'm not really sure that you actually beat him. But if they do believe that he beat him, then they have to say, well, if I beat him then, why don't you think that I'm going to beat him again. I mean, I beat him. I'm 4 years older, but he's 4 years older. So but but the only question is, do they suspect that really, there was something deeply wrong with that election? But anyway, as I say, I don't think he's going to step aside. I think he's going to be there. But I think the chances of his stepping aside have gone up. I think that the odds are now more favorable for his leaving. But even so, I have my doubts. Anyway, let's go to see what issues people are raising and on our Gaggles page. And let me go here. Cynthia, always very good to see you. We missed you on Tuesday. And anyway, Danaki says, well, George, the pundits were wrong again. Our beloved Ursula passed with flying colors. Also, it's really sad to see the GOP become MAGA, become Israel first, become Trump messianic cult. And I'm a living witness of cults of personality, but the Ceausescus were nowhere near the levels I see with Trump sycophants. The funny thing is that, I mean, you obviously, Danaki, you know about Ceausescu far more than I do. I never thought the Ceausescus were really into the personality cult. I mean, I think that, it was obviously a dictatorship. I mean, there was no democracy, but I didn't think it was it was a personality cult in the way that the Ceausescu were ubiquitous and we were supposed to hang on every word they said. But the other thing, of course, is what you're saying about Ursula von der Leyen, who was overwhelmingly, I have to say, overwhelmingly re-elected as president of the European Commission, which was quite remarkable because this is a person really who has failed upwards throughout her life. She was a disastrous family minister in Germany, and of course she was a terrible defense minister. She only really got her start in politics because of her dad. Her dad was a very prominent figure within the German CDU. Indeed, he had been talked about as someone who would be the CDU standard bearer in I think it was the 1976 election, the one that Helmut Kohl was the standard bearer. So that's how she got into CDU politics, and then of course she was an absolute disaster as a defense minister. But for some reason, Angela Merkel really liked her, and I guess maybe she had she was everything that Angela Merkel wasn't. I mean, she was very nicely turned out. She was perfectly coiffed. She had 7 children. Angela Merkel didn't have any. She was a Westerner. Again, she was one of 7 children herself. She has 7 children of her own, and lives in this the very rich, successful part of Germany. The rich, successful Germany that continues in perpetuity. Long predates Hitler. Long in existence after Hitler. Because Merkel never had any of that. I mean, she was from the East and just looks a little bit of a dumpling. But, that's a matter of speculation as to why Merkel liked her. But Merkel kind of pushed her and then to be this president of the European Commission. And what's interesting is that the European Union Court of Justice ruled against Ursula yesterday. On the eve of this vote, you ruled against her and said, she has to come clean about COVID. She has to explain why it is that I think she ordered some 4.5 billion doses of the COVID vaccine from Pfizer, because that comes to 10 doses per citizen of the EU, 10 doses per man, woman, child, infant. So why did she do that? And she's basically given no information at all, and no one can get into her telephone records. And yet, despite all of that, she's reelected by a bigger margin than her victory in 2019. And I don't know whether you saw in the European Parliament debate today, some Polish MEP was denouncing her and denouncing her net zero policies or Green New Deal policies, her policies on European farmers, European truckers. And von der Leyen was just smirking. This was this in the face of this ridiculous, her record, which was just so horrific. And all she had is, just a smirk. I don't know. I mean, they had some ghastly people as president of the EU Commission, and what's so disgusting about it is that she is an unelected person. I mean, even when you mentioned, well, she passed with flying colors, she's elected. She wasn't actually elected to anything. She's still an unelected bureaucrat. I mean, yeah, the European Parliament voted for her, but only after the recommendation of the European Commission, the European Council. But she's not in any way accountable to the voters. And yet she goes to all of the meetings, all of the G7, there she is, G20, there she is, NATO conference, there she is. Wherever there's any kind of a meeting, she's there, and she's always presented as the president of the European Union, as if she's the president. I mean, she's not president of anything. But this whole idea that she's the president of the European Union, it's just so utterly repugnant. And then she gives the State of the Union address. She delivers a State of the Union address to the European Parliament, cribbed from the American practice. But there's a difference. I mean, you've got the American practice is that, you have a president who is indeed elected by all of the people, the one office in the United States, which is elected by all of the people. And Congress, again, whether it's the House or the Senate, they are all of the members are genuinely accountable to the voters. But the European Parliament, they're not accountable to any voters. The European Parliament doesn't even have any powers. It has no powers. It has no legislative powers. So that whole, she delivers the State of the Union, it's an unelected leader of nothing, leader of a bureaucracy, unelected leader talking to a parliament that doesn't do the minimum that a parliament is supposed to do, namely legislate. And says, anyway, the other point that Danakim says is, it's really sad to see the GOP become MAGA, become Israel first, become Trump messianic cult. The Israel, yeah, I mean that's a kind of a given that this strange kind of metamorphosis from America first to Israel first, and the way they completely identify America and Israel as if they're one country. So it's like when you celebrate Israel, you extol the glories of Israel, you're extolling the glories of the United States. It's a very, very bizarre phenomenon. And so that, and somehow, whenever one raises that issue, it's like, well, which is it? I mean, you support America or you support Israel? The very act of asking such a question, it's is obviously a sign of anti-Semitism. I remember Chuck Schumer. He was he was in Congress. This was a long time ago. He was a congressman at the time, and he was on Crossfire, that CNN show, and he was confronted by the voice from the right, which was John Sununu. John Sununu has just been fired as White House chief of staff, and he was the voice on the right. And Sununu, I think he had some Lebanese extraction. Anyway, he was not a huge fan of Israel, as the people in the George H.W. Bush administration were not great fans of Israel's. But he confronted Schumer, just ask him, so, which are you? Are you a representative of Israel, or are you a representative of the United States? And then Schumer really just let him fly with the, basically suggesting that it was anti-Semitic. This had to have been 1991 or something, that Sununu was anti-Semitic in making that suggestion. But the point was, again, it's a way of not answering the question, because I can't remember the exact issue, but the point was, Sununu, is that, hey, as an American legislator, you need to be thinking about what's good for America, not what's good for Israel. Don't start thinking about that at all. Your primary responsibility is to think about what's good for America. And so I think that's why I think he thought, well, this is a reasonable question. You ask a congressman, well, which are you? Are you a representative for Israel, or are you a representative of the United States? And already, boom, it's anti-Semitic to raise any such issue, even though it's an issue that they fail to answer for obvious reasons. Anyway, Donakinen says, it will be interesting to watch if the Dems completely implode over the replacement of Biden. They risk losing both houses of Congress as well. And then, both houses of Congress. And not that it means much with the stupid GOP at the helm. Well, I agree with you. And I think that's why Biden has a strong argument that he can make against the Democrats, which is, you are taking a huge risk. You bundle me aside in favor of whom? Because once you do this, once you create this chaos at the center, you push aside somebody who had been voted on. There had been a primary process. He had been democratically elected as the standard bearer of the party. And if you push him aside and replace him by someone else, someone not Biden, any person but Biden, then you are attacking democracy. You're going against the will of the Democratic Party electorate, and chances are you're going to have a complete collapse. That's what this is what happens when you push aside a leader in favor of nothing. I mean, that's what happens with coups. Why are coups such a bad idea? Because you get rid of a government, and then you don't have anything to replace it with. So that's, I think, Biden's strongest argument. And I don't think any of the Democrats have any good rejoinder. Maybe we'll do better with Harris. Maybe we'll do better with Gavin Newsom. Maybe we'll do better with Gretchen Whitmer. Maybe, but It may also be that we will have a total collapse. The party will just implode. So that's a real risk, and I think that it's very interesting because we here at the Gaggle always point out how disciplined the Democrats are. They are very, very good at sticking together. They know the party line from AOC to Bernie Sanders to Elizabeth Warren to Obama to Nancy Pelosi to Chuck Schumer. They're all reading from the same script. They're very, very disciplined. And it's the Republicans that are at loggerheads. The Republicans who aren't even able to defend their man, their president. Republicans were unable to defend Trump from that obviously bogus, ridiculous nonsense of Russiagate. It was obvious. Anyone could have seen it. It was an obvious lie. And it was, it was cooked up by the Democrats, cooked up by Hillary Clinton, cooked up by the CIA, and then the Democrats in Congress ran with it in order to destroy the Trump presidency. It was obvious. And the Republicans were, well, we're going to have, probably hearings and all this, and so on. And remember, the Senate Intelligence Committee, whose chairman was a Republican. He was a crook. Burr. I think it was the North Carolina. I don't know if Valerie's here. Valerie will remember Burr. And Burr, they published that 5-volume report on Russiagate, in which they actually subscribed to all of the nonsense. Of course, they didn't have any evidence to support any of their claims. They just went by the media reports. They just simply did a copy and paste, and they just reported everything the New York Times said, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and that's what they took as evidence. They had no evidence at all that it was any kind of Trump-Russia collusion. And of course, everyone seized on that Senate Intelligence Committee report. As I say, the chairman of which was a Republican. So they seized on that. Oh, look, there's evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. But they had nothing at their disposal. They had less at their disposal than Mueller, because Mueller at least had, the FBI reports. He could, subpoena Justice Department officials. You could ask the CIA and whatever. They couldn't do anything. So all they had was were newspaper reports. So it was completely worthless. But because they accepted that there was indeed Trump-Russia collusion, that 5-volume or whatever report on Russiagate it was seized on by, we were right. There was Trump-Russia collusion. As I say, the chairman was a Republican. Anyway, so Danaki says, odds of Biden really dropping out, would that also mean retiring from DC effective immediately as well? No question. I think if Biden announces that he will not run for re-election, he has to step aside. I mean, he just has to step aside, because then if he says, I'm basically not physically up to it, then he's going to have to say, well, I'm not up to doing this job. And yeah, because he can't just hang around for 6 months when he's physically and mentally not up to the task. I mean, it's a big job. You got your finger on the trigger. You can't just stay on and say, well, I'm so decrepit that I can't campaign, but I can be relied on whether to start World War III. So no, he would have to step aside, and then Harris takes over. And that's why, as I say, there's no other option. If not Biden, it's going to be Harris. Anyway, Mary Grossman, good to see you, Mary. Just listen to Dialogue Works, and D. Orlov called Vance mini Trump. a harmless, fun name, Mini Trump. Yeah, okay. And then Mary says on DD Geopolitics, a funny music video, the Chinese bros forced Biden and Trump to sing patriotic songs in praise of China. It almost looks real. All right, thank you. And then Mary says, I tried to send this video to the gaggle, and you couldn't do it. You should be able to. I mean, I think if you can download it, well, I mean, I think you could probably just I mean, if you can't download the video and then try to upload it on our locals page, if you can't do that, then just send the URL. That should be. Um, and then Judy says, "Is this your video?" Okay, all right. Professor Wall, long time no see, George. Exactly, long time. Has been a long time, Professor. I cannot help getting the feeling that what happened on Saturday was an operation to just gin up the anger within the country, and that they are going to follow up with an attempt on the Democratic nominee or RFK or a mass casualty event just to ignite the flame higher in hopes of bringing about a civil war in the U.S. Well, that's the thesis propounded by Alex Jones. And again, Alex Jones is pretty good with his predictions. And he said right away that what's likely to happen is an assassination attempt on Biden, successful or unsuccessful, and that this will then be blamed on Trump and his followers. And the Trump and his followers have been urging retaliation, have been urging revenge, and that somebody, some MAGA nutcase, had decided to take a shot at Biden. And then, of course, once you've done that, and then it could be to provoke a civil war, or it could be to introduce draconian measures, mass lockups and so on. I find that plausible. I do think that that's a, that's something. I thought it was very interesting how that story of the revenge attacks, the retaliation attacks, how suddenly the media were all repeating it, really almost within hours of the shooting on Saturday. I mean, like, it never even occurred to me that anybody would start talking about revenge and retaliation and whatever. But it's interesting, the media were all on that, and therefore warning that somehow this MAGA, the really dangerous people in America, were likely to do that. So I think that's something to keep an eye upon. I think there's a lot of things that could happen between now and November the 5th. I mean, it could be something like that. I mean, let's say mass casualty event. I have to think that the Democrats do not surrender power. I mean, they are absolutely ruthless, and hence this pressure they're applying against Biden. But the problem they have is that they still can't guarantee that they're going to retain power. So that's why, if some big event, then they can exploit that as a way to retain power. No, exactly. It could be a civil war. It could be, hey, we have to postpone the election or whatever. Because we know that if that happens, if, let's say, Biden is shot, or even, even more devastating, imagine if it's Obama was shot, there would be mass rioting in all of the cities, and there would be a stand-down order given by governors, which is not to do anything to stop this. And then, all of it would then be blamed on Trump. So I think that may explain why Trump is taking a subdued stance at the moment. I mean, and going for unity, because he may be suspecting that he's being set up, that something or other is going to happen, and that he's going to get blamed for it. And then they're going to try and take some words that he said in which he's calling for retribution and so on. I mean, they've claimed that he's calling for retribution, but now directly along this, that they would suggest that he's calling for violence against Biden or Obama or the Clintons or whatever, and then he would be to blame for that. So I think that's if that's what he's thinking, I think that's a very sensible of him to take a very subdued position, call for unity. No one does anything extreme. No one does anything that's incendiary. No. Let's take a deep breath and be calm, because he may be being set up. But I absolutely agree with you, the professor. I think that there's a lot of things are going to happen between now and November. It's not going to be like the way people are suggesting now. Trump's got it in the bag, and then it's just a sort of inexorable march to victory in November, with polls showing a ever widening Trump lead. It just isn't going to happen like that. I think that's just not the way America works anymore, and it's not the way the Democrats work. Anyway, and then Professor goes on. The congressional polls are actually pointing to a Democrat wipeout in both houses. If Trump wins, which I doubt, he will be nullified because of a completely hostile Congress. That may be one of their backup plans. There's no question. I think that the Democrats have made clear that if they do have a majority in the House, they will not certify a Trump win. I mean, that's a given. That's an absolute guarantee. They will not certify a Trump win. And also, I mean, if on January the 6th, 2025, it'll be if Trump wins, Vice President Harris will do what Mike Pence did not do. She will also absolutely not certify a Trump win. So yeah, I just that's one of the backup plans. But the sort of the mass violence. Yeah, I mean, we saw what happened in 2020, how the Democrats used that against Trump, which was very clever, because and here I have to say we used to have Robert Barnes on at that time, and Barnes was saying that, oh, this violence is going to work for Trump, and I never for one moment believed the violence would work for Trump. I thought the violence would work against Trump, because the violence would be blamed on him. However much it's ridiculous, because law enforcement is not in his control, but he would be blamed for it. And the analogy with 1968 and the violence of 68, which Nixon was able to exploit when he won, was very different, because Nixon was not in power. Nixon was in the opposition. The Democrats were in power, not only because you had the Johnson-Humphrey administration in Washington, but the Democrats were in control of the cities. So if the cities were out of control, then it was obviously the fault of all the Democrat mayors. So Nixon could then be the law and order candidate, and use that to his advantage. And even that, they didn't, it didn't work that well, that effectively for him. But there was no way that Trump could use that. Trump was the president. I mean, fairly or unfairly, he got blamed for what happened. And even got blamed for what happened to George Floyd. I mean, again, the media did that. The way they played it was, somehow Trump was inciting white racism, and white racism was to blame for the death of George Floyd. Anyway, Robert, thank you very much, Robert. Really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. Is that Robert says, Ari, the Bloomberg interview, while Trump does seem to want to put tariffs on Chinese goods, he wants to put them on many other countries as well. Yeah, agreed. The question is whether Trump is a protectionist or, as one might hope, it's a strategic intended to compel other countries to eliminate their tariffs against the U.S. I don't. Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I think that Trump, Trump is kind of thinking about both. Um, he, yeah. I mean, if we think of, let's say, Pat Buchanan, who was the first to raise the tariffs question. I mean, Buchanan was a protectionist. I think he took a kind of Hamiltonian view of the American economy, the infant industries argument, which is you use protectionism, you use trade barriers in order to protect your industries, and that was it. That was we need a manufacturing base, and Trump often sounds like that. And Vance also sounds like that. That well, essentially using the infant industries argument. You need the tariff barriers behind which you can build up your manufacturing base. I think that's also the argument of Navarro. But I think you're right, Robert, in that Trump is a kind of a transactional figure. He may be also thinking about, well, I want to promote our goods, and I want the other countries to open up their economies to our goods. And if they do that, if they allow for the imports of our cars, or then we can let up on the tariffs on their goods. So that, I think, that is definitely a strand of thought with Trump. I mean, he does, in that Bloomberg interview, he said that how he was talking to Merkel, and he was again threatening with the tariffs on German cars, and then he says, well, how many Fords and Chevrolets are sold in Munich? And then, kind of amusingly, according to Bloomberg, he because this is Trump talking, describing this conversation with Merkel, and then Trump apparently mimicked Merkel's German accent and saying something like, "Well, I don't know, maybe not so many," and then Trump said, "Well, how about zero?" And then so you get a sense that if Merkel were willing to open up the German economy to American goods, then he would let up on the tariffs. I do wonder, though, how realistic such a policy is, because I mean, Americans tried that for years and years with the Japanese. Remember how many times did they try to cajole the Japanese to open up their economy to American cars and other American manufactured products? And the Japanese would always promise, yeah, we're going to do that, and but they never did. And then the Japanese will say, well, what can we do? Because if our people don't want to buy American products, we can't very well force them. And I think Merkel would say, look, I mean, we have Germans. Germans want to buy German cars. They do. They just buy German cars. They're not going to buy Fords and Chevys. So I don't know how effective the argument is. I mean, so that's why maybe you just simply slap on the tariffs, and then the Europeans have to live with that. So yeah, but still, it's an interesting issue, because I think Trump is instinctively not necessarily a kind of a protectionist in the way that Pat Buchanan was. Cynthia, again, very, very good to see you. Cynthia says, And thank you very much, Cynthia, for your generosity. Cynthia says, I'm a bit puzzled as to why Trump picked a running mate who's entirely checkbox free. Could it mean DEI politics is on its way out? Or is it simply the case that Trump felt he's so far ahead in the polls that he doesn't need to depend on the crutch of DEI to win the race for him? Then again, he may feel like he really needs a man by his side in order to keep himself from getting shot again, since the Secret Service is obviously not manly enough to do that for him. I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, you have to then think about it that Trump cannot run again. This is his last campaign. So he doesn't have to think about pleasing any particular constituency. Any constituency that's going to take it out on him. It's also, it's not that DEI is going out. It's just that it's hard to figure out what really works when you make your VP selection. You have all of the criteria that are supposed to be, oh yeah, well, we need the geographic balance. We have a northeastern liberal, so he's got to pick a southern conservative. That was Michael Dukakis's calculation. That was kind of also Jack Kennedy's calculation with Lyndon Johnson. Then again, on the Jimmy Carter, he's a southern conservative, so he picks a northern liberal as a VP. So you got the geographic balance and ideological balance. That's the way you normally, these things have always been done, except when they're not done like that. So when Bill Clinton decided to nominate Al Gore to his VP, he threw the whole formula aside, because he said, well, we're now two Southerners, two conservative Southerners. And so everyone who had been thinking, oh yeah, well, Bill Clinton is a kind of conservative or a centrist Southern Democrat, so he's obviously going to pick a liberal to balance the ticket. Instead, he picked somebody exactly like him, and it worked. If one thinks about let's say the Dukakis pick, when Dukakis picked Lloyd Bentsen in '88, I mean, that was just the perfect selection, because again, not just because of the geographic and ideological balance, but that Lloyd Bentsen was actually a very good candidate. And not only was he a very good candidate, I mean, even, he had a very kind of, very urbane, patrician manner. And then he did very well in that debate. I mean, he had that debate with Dan Quayle. He landed that knockout blow, Senator Jack Kennedy. And he didn't do him any good. Dukakis was destroyed in that election. So now, going back to Trump, Trump, I think, may well have been thinking, yeah, I don't need to think along these sort of these DEI terms, because these people that I can think of, I mean, as I said, I thought he was going to select Elise Stefanik, because I thought he would do that. I thought he would think in terms of selecting a woman, and from New York, and so make the Democrats work for New York, and but he didn't do that. He decided that he wanted the heir apparent, and I think that's very, I think very, very bold of him. I don't think DEI is out. I think it's still going to be there, and we'll see what happens when he starts appointing people in his administration. But just for that slot, the VP slot, I think he decided that the best thing would be to think about an heir apparent, because after all, he's 77. There's always a pretty reasonable chance that you're not going to see it through. You might not make it through a 4-year term. So if something happens to him, then he can say MAGA republicanism, populist conservatism, blue collar conservatism. That's the way we're going to go, and who better to carry this forward than J.D. Vance. I think I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing. But it's interesting, though, that had he selected Elise Stefanik, I'm sure the Republicans would all be celebrating and saying, what a brilliant choice. I mean, they're saying Vance is a brilliant choice, but they'd be saying Stefanik is a brilliant choice. They'd say, whoa, fantastic. She's really smart. She's a Harvard graduate. She roasted all those liberal presidents of those liberal elite colleges in Congress and all the rest. And she's really good on American foreign policy, and she's really good on Israel. And everyone was singing the praises of Elise Stefanik. I think she would have been a terrible selection. But everyone will be saying, I think that goes back to Danucki's point about the Trumpian cult. Still, whoa, brilliant. I mean, if he'd said Nikki Haley, no, I don't think no one would be celebrating. If he'd done Marco Rubio, there'd be no celebrations. But there would be celebrations. It was Stefanik. But going back, but in terms of is DEI out? I don't think so. I think it's too deeply embedded in American and European life. I mean, it's not just America. This is, all bad habits start in the United States and then they move to the rest of the world. So the rest of the world just simply apes blindly everything that the Americans do. They just copy all the social fashions, the social fads, cultural norms. Boom! They just take it over, lock, stock, and barrel. So that all of this has been taken over by the Europeans. But yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable to think in terms of an heir apparent. And I think, to be honest, he probably gets on quite well with Vance. I think it's there's also the question of chemistry. I mean, he didn't particularly hit it off with Pence. That was a classic case of how you appoint someone to a VP, and then you have to think in terms of, well, what's he going to do for you? And Pence, he needed Pence in 2016. He needed him to shore up his support among evangelicals who they knew about Trump's lifestyle, his New York womanizing and party going and all the rest. He needed some pious figure who could vouch for him. So that was a sensible decision, even though it eventually cost Trump the presidency. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. And then Cynthia goes on. I watched Save the Tiger 1973 today, George, only because you told me you really liked it. Oh, okay. I thought now you're going to say, well, I didn't like it. But no, you said, well, I liked it a lot too. So maybe you can put it up to vote against some other films that are like it. But the problem is I can't think of any. Well, I can't think of any either along those lines. But that's a good question, because what is it about? I mean, if you say, well, how would one characterize it? I mean, I think one would characterize it like middle-aged man going through a kind of an existential crisis. But it's a little banal. But I think it's much more like American patriot who feels his country is being taken away from him. I mean, one that it occurs to me might be like it is, and I don't know. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Is that film that Michael Douglas made in I think it was 1993. I think called Falling Down. Remember that guy who had been laid off? Kind of middle-aged guy was laid off, and then it goes a bit crazy. But I mean, but there the theme was somehow you've done all the right things in life, and but you find that the country that you would work for, the country that you had loved, that basically turned its back on you. You're on your own, and there's really nothing to admire left. They just dump you out onto the street. So I mean, so Falling Down maybe something similar to Save the Tiger. So that would be the theme of somebody who feels that the America that you love has abandoned you. That somehow you're on your own. Doesn't really, the only people who matter are the rich and well connected, and you, who sort of small town, middle class patriot, is just so much garbage to be dumped on the street. I mean, it's something like Save the Tiger and Falling Down are very much in the sort of Trumpian Vance kind of mode. I mean, particularly Trumpian. I mean, it's where that's the forgotten American. The kind of middle class person who has done everything right, and he suddenly finds himself at the end of his tether. He's going out of business. He has nothing, and no one really gives a damn about him. But I thought that it's a good film, and it's a very unusual film for Lemon, because I mean Lemon is of course a very good actor, but there's always a certain kind of I don't know, slightly whininess about the Lemon characters. Here he's kind of, there's nothing whiny about him. He's kind of tough, certainly embittered, but yeah. Anyway, Robert says that the reports about BlackRock short-selling stock in Trump's social media companies, scintillating as they are, now appear to be greatly exaggerated, on the order of 100,000 rather than 100 million, as first reported, and thus negligible amount for a behemoth like BlackRock. That's my impression as well. I haven't followed that story that closely, but I agree with you. That was also my impression. It all seems somewhat overstated. Judy, thank you very much, Judy. Good to see you. And so Judy says, the New York Times gets it. It's a twofer. Donald Trump Jr. helped elevate J.D. Vance, and he's not done. And then Vance was accompanied by a man who had pushed behind the scenes as hard as almost anyone to put him on the ticket in the first place, Donald Trump Jr. It was definitely Don Jr. Who did that. It's sort of an interesting why they kind of get on so well. I mean, Vance's personality is very interesting. I mean, he's very smooth and polished and engaging and likable and charming, and you would never think, that about this, very difficult upbringing. His, how hard his early years were. It's like he doesn't carry any of that as in any way a burden. I mean, it shouldn't really, but if you think about, let's say Nixon, who had kind of very hard upbringing, again lived in poverty, he carried as a burden. I mean, it marked him for the rest of his life, but Vance just doesn't have any of that. I mean, so that's why you can, if you look at Vance and you look at Don Jr., they seem to, they look almost like they've been friends, since they were kids. So anyway, When they each deliver primetime address on Wednesday night, the moment will mark not only Mr. Vance's national debut, but the unquestioned arrival of Don Jr. as a political force to be reckoned with. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, Don Jr. obviously is uh, he's played a major role now, generally as a political activist. I mean, he has his own Rumble show with a huge following. He's part of Bannon world. He's often on with Bannon, and Bannon, who is now in prison, has he's one of the alternate hosts. So Bannon has different people hosting his show, and Don Jr. is one of the alternate Bannon hosts. Funnily enough, I always thought that Don Jr. would be the heir apparent. I actually thought that he would, that Trump would eventually delegate to Don Jr. The role of the leader of the MAGA movement. But that's obviously not the case anymore, because now Vance has taken on that role. But I am surprised that Don Jr. didn't make more of a pitch, I think, for himself, that he's he should be. But and I don't know whether, I mean, I guess he likes the role of kingmaker, because if Don Jr. was serious about a political career for himself, I mean, I think he would have made more of an attempt to run for office. Now, I don't know how feasible that would be, because he's in New York. So what would make sense for him is to run for the Senate from New York, or run as governor of New York, and that's a tall order. I mean, it's such a democratic state, so it would be very difficult for him to pull that off. But he would have to do that if he was serious about his own political career. But evidently he wasn't, and that's why I think he's happy to have delegated this to J.D. Vance. So I think he likes to be the kingmaker. But it's a shame, though, that Don Jr. didn't play more of a role in Trump's first term, because I think it was really the worst of Trump's children that did play a major role in his first term. And I'm talking about the unspeakably ghastly Ivanka, and of course the unspeakably revolting husband of hers, Kushner, who really, on the basis of nothing, because they had nothing to do with Trump's victory in 2016, they just moved in lock, stock, and barrel into the White House, and then started, grabbing more and more power for themselves. And of course, they were, absolutely disastrous. Now, we've been told that Ivanka will not play a major role in another Trump term. I'm not convinced by that. I think she's going to be speaking tonight. And if you recall, in 2020, she gave an absolutely catastrophic, awful, ghastly, revolting speech. So this was the convention, was obviously, that was the lockdown convention. But it was the Black Lives Matter riot time. So that was when, the cities were burning, BLM were on the rampage, there were, buildings were being burned, businesses were being destroyed. And what did Ivanka talk about? She was talking about the how we have this wonderful program. We're releasing people from federal prison. All the people who have been wrong. What was it called? Is it the two-step program? Is it the two-step thing that she came up with? This is a woman who knew nothing. She knows nothing at all about penal policy, penal reform, absolutely nothing. And so this is her project, deciding to release people from prison. And so she went on and on and on in her speech about all the people that the Trump administration had released. I mean, I guess this was the pitch. Oh, we're going to appeal to the black voters, as if that's the way to appeal to black voters. Hey, we're sending criminals out onto the street. Um, but then she said, I think her parting words were, and we've only just begun. As if somehow in a second Trump term, they're going to unlock all of the prison doors, just let everybody out. And this is a woman that knew nothing at all about any of that. But she thought, hey, this is very cute. I mean, she'd been a fashion designer. She was a fashion model. I mean, something. Hey, this is cool. I'm going to get into penal reform. That's a cool thing to do. So, that whole thing, that was so disgusting. It was one of the most disgusting aspects of Trump's first term, because that was real nepotism. I mean, nepotism. Okay, there's always a certain amount of nepotism, but when it's that naked, when you're putting forward people who have no real qualifications, and they're just getting these jobs because he's your dad. That's Hunter Biden territory. So we'll see what she says today in her speech at the convention. But I'm not wholly convinced that she's not going to play a role in the Trump second term. Anna Marie, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Good evening, George and everyone. Thank you, Anna Marie. Always good to hear from you. You should let us know how things are going in Switzerland. It's one of these places that we don't hear much about, but we'd like to know more about what they own. I mean, they've been playing a kind of a shitty game on Ukraine and Russia and so on. Anyway, Robert says, to answer Cynthia's question by J.D. Vance, Vance is from Ohio, is partial to William McKinley, the U.S. president who embodied the 19th century view that America was at its best as a quasi-isolationist industrial dynamo. Vance apparently pitched McKinleyism to Trump, who was quite receptive. I think it's very interesting because in this interview with Bloomberg, Trump talks a great deal about McKinley, and it's very interesting because when you're reading it, you think, well, who'd have thunk that Trump would know so much about McKinley? McKinley is not exactly a household name. I mean, people know that he was assassinated, but they don't really know that much about him. So it's very interesting that Trump should talk so much about McKinley, but he liked the McKinley policy of tariffs. And again, tariffs to protect domestic industries. So again, this is the sort of the Buchananite view, essentially the infant industries argument. It was certainly what America was based on, but again, it was also what Germany did, which was such a huge success for Germany in the 19th century, which is that it protected its own domestic industries from foreign competition. But I mean, still raising the issue: is Trump really a protectionist, or is he just using this as a leverage in order to get other people to lift their barriers? The problem is, as I say, it's very hard to get others. I mean, the point is that with these barriers is that the Japanese or the Germans are going to say, we don't have any barriers. We don't have any barriers. We don't have any trade barriers. People don't want to buy them. The Japanese will always be saying, they used to say this for decades. No. I mean, we can't help that. I mean, Japanese people, they buy Toyotas. They're not going to buy American cars. What can we do? So I think your best bet is just to go for protectionism. I think trying to get others to buy your products, I think that's a fool's errand. But I do think it's very interesting that he's suddenly saying, "Oh, McKinley is a very underrated president." Robert says the light makes it looks like you're being interrogated at police headquarters. That hasn't happened yet, but I do think that Ursula von der Leyen will at some stage interrogate, we have ways of making you talk, you Schweinhund. So I think that could happen. Anyway, Professor Wall says, in regards to your lamp, the location is good, but you need a different color bulb. White or blue tinted bulbs are better, especially for camera focus. Yeah, but I don't know how to do that. I think I have no idea how to change that bulb. Anyway, 60 Cents says, it's good to see you, 60 Cents. Just out there on the West Coast. Greetings, George and fellow Gagglers. It's about 12:25 p.m. in Silicon Valley. Gavin Newsom is Nancy Pelosi's nephew, just saying, as it is never publicized. He's not really her nephew. I mean, is he? I mean, is that? I mean, or are you just? It's just a figure of speech that he's her nephew. But she's definitely. I mean, Newsom and Pelosi, and obviously Adam Schiff, they're one part of the California Democratic Party. That's very different from the wing of the Democratic Party that is embodied by Harris and, of course, her mentor, Willie Brown. So, I mean, that's different strands of the Democratic Party. But even so, they're going to have to live with Harris. I mean, these are Pelosi may, I'm sure she would like Newsom to be the nominee, but she can't do anything about it. And then Mary says, yes to Judy Hotchkiss. That is the video. Good. Okay, thank you. Cynthia says, Mike Ben's tweets, safer with a fat cow. Oh, yeah, I saw that, with a fat cow than with Biden DHS Secret Service. Here's a screenshot of this fat cow he's talking about. Yeah, I saw that, the fat cow, and I saw the one, the huge cow. And I saw the picture with John Travolta, one of his parts, and then John Travolta's got his back to the fat cow, and he's completely oblivious. There's this huge fat cow on the roof, and mooing and so on, but he just seems oblivious and doesn't even notice the fat cows. So, let's see, go back. So yeah. So let's go back. Yeah, so anyway, Summer Petro says, Ursula von der Leyen dished on Orban and Hungary without mention of either. Instead, the usual tired no to appeasement rhetoric was deployed against. Yeah, I saw all that. And again, her commitment that we will go on to the bitter end in Ukraine. We will fight to the last Ukrainian. We'll be there for as long as it takes, which is very nice when you're Ursula von der Leyen living in this very, very prosperous part of Western Germany, and you have a very nice house, and your 7 children, not one of those 7 children has the slightest intention to go fight in Ukraine, and which is par for the course for all of these European elites. None of them will fight, but the Ukrainians can go on dying, and then she can say completely without any cost to her, because she's a very wealthy woman, and her husband is a very wealthy man, and her family is very wealthy, and her husband's family is very wealthy, and they're not suffering in any way from this war. So she can then afford to say, yeah, we'll be there for as long as it takes. And of course, she rants and raves against Orban, but she can easily do that. I mean, Orban didn't vote for her to be president of the EU. Anyway, thank you, Summer Petrus. And Danaki says, oh, yes, it was in the 80s. Actually, it started in 1971 after he visited Mao and Kim, but accelerated. So we're talking about Ceausescu, but accelerated in the 80s when he decided to pay off the foreign debt and instituted austerity measures, rolling blackouts, etc. So it was no more bread, but a whole lot of circus. However, nobody said he was the Messiah or King David incarnate. No, that's what I think. It never was. And of course, his policy of paying off the debt was a very sensible one because he saw what happened in Poland. I mean, anybody with half a brain could see that what Poland was doing in the 1970s, when they were borrowing like mad, and therefore becoming completely dependent on the West, was going to end in disaster. And then you have to then wonder again, the Soviets just allowed this to happen. They didn't make any attempt to stop Edward Gierek, who had succeeded Gomulka. He was just bringing in all this money. Now, the Western creditors, of course, knew exactly what they were doing, because all creditors know what they're doing. They know sooner or later the debts are going to come due, and sooner or later the debtor is going to say, I can't pay, I don't have anything. And that's that moment the creditor basically takes over the debtor's assets. That's the whole point. And anybody could see that was where Poland was heading, and that's why Ceausescu paid off his debt. But again, it's interesting because why did Ceausescu have such a large debt? Well, because Romania was being pushed. Ever since Romania started carving out a, quote, independent, unquote, foreign policy. I mean, you talked about his visit to Mao. That was a big deal at the time. And that was earlier than that when he visited Mao. Oh, maybe, I can't remember, maybe it was in the early 70s when he visited Mao. And then in 1969, Richard Nixon visited Ceausescu. He visited Romania. That's a very big deal. An American president lands in Bucharest. Why would he go to Bucharest? It's not like Romania is at the center of the universe. But Nixon went to Bucharest as part of the policy of exploiting the fissures within the communist world. So at that time, the Western powers were very eager to lend money to communist states. They knew exactly what was going to happen. And of course, the collapse in Poland that took place in 1980, 81. The collapse in Yugoslavia was a little bit later, but it was the same idea because both Yugoslavia, Poland, Romania were being bankrolled. They were getting lots and lots of money from the West, and they were all going to end in disaster. And Poland ended in disaster. And then Yugoslavia obviously ended in disaster, same kind of thing. Hey, you got to pay up. Your debts have come due. Well, we don't know how to pay up. Well, then we, and who's we? We, the IMF, have got a great plan for you of how you can pay off your debt. And what does that involve? Well, of course, that involves getting rid of all your industries that gave people jobs. That all those job security. Those big industries. They just vanished, and suddenly people were out of work. People were in poverty, and that was always the plan. So Ceausescu was smart enough to avoid that, and that's why he said, no, that's not going to happen to me, and so he started paying off those debts. What was interesting though is why it didn't work. I mean, obviously, the West was always planning to overthrow the communist regimes in Eastern Europe, and Romania was no exception. It's still interesting why, even though Ceausescu had been so clever in paying off the debt to avoid the dependence on the West, it didn't do him any good. He was still overthrown, arrested, show trial, executed. Um, quite shocking, quite brutal um, uh, overthrow, which was, of course, the plan in Yugoslavia as well. I mean, the Americans were planning a kind of a Ceausescu ending for Milosevic in 10 years later in 99 2000. Anyway, as so I've always been a little bit sympathetic to Ceausescu. I mean, I think it's I think he was sensible enough to try to get himself out of a hole, but it didn't. It wasn't enough to save him. Marty, thank you very much, Marty. Really appreciate your generosity. Thank you. Mary Grossman says Telegram site foreign agent Intel Ursula signed a contract to org Genesis of a company owned by Pfizer for 4.6 billion doses. That's it, 4.6 billion doses. 10 doses per person. 10 doses per person. I mean, can you imagine the lunacy? So if you, let's say you got a family of 4, you got 40 doses. And so she never really, and the people wanted to explain how did she come up with this ridiculous number. Never really gave an explanation. Anyway, the director of Org Genesis is Heiko von der Legend, Ursula's husband. Yeah. And then Cynthia says, yeah, you do look a little brighter, George, but I never minded you looking a bit dark. Oh, see, that's very nice. That's what I like. That exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, this is a lot better. It was real shit before. No, this is yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Cynthia. I really appreciate it. I mean, to me it seems, yeah, it's a little brighter. I'm not impressed. I mean, I'm looking at the picture and it doesn't look especially impressive. So I after all the pressure that I've come under, I don't see there's such a huge improvement. but anyway, thank you, Cynthia. Robert says, in my opinion, the best brief history of Israel is given by Murray Rothbard in War Guilt in the Middle East. Okay, he wrote that in 1967. Rothbard argues that the Jewish homeland idea originates with the traditionalists in order to preserve the Yiddish language and Judaism, but ends up being completely transformed into a militant colonialist Zionism, shorn of Yiddish and totally secular. So this is the thank you very much giving us the link to the essay. I haven't read this one. I don't know. I mean, I have to believe, though, that implicit in Zionism from the beginning was this colonialism. If you just wanted to preserve Yiddish, it wouldn't have been hard. That was never a big deal. But from the beginning, the moment the Jews started arriving in Palestine, very well funded operation, it was with a view to creating this colonialist state. It was with a view to displacing the local population, and it was with a view to creating a state of the Jews. And the indigenous population, the Muslim population, knew exactly what the Israeli settlers were doing, which is why they were very distressed about it from the beginning, that they were going to create a state here, and they didn't really hide very much their ultimate intent. So the traditionalism and the Yiddish thing. I mean, I don't know. You had that in Europe, you had that in America. This was something very different. But I'm going to read that article by Murray Rothbard because it sounds rather interesting. Marty says, I like the new lighting. Thank you so much, Marty. And then Len's Luck says, hang on, does he seem the peaceful protests? the peaceful protests. I don't know. You will see what what happens with the peaceful protests. As I say, I mean, when I was talking to the professor earlier, uh, I think there's a lot of tricks um, up the Democrats' sleeve, and there's a lot of things that are going to happen between now and November, and the peaceful protests phenomenon may be making a comeback. Danaki says, "Yeah, American cars will surely be very popular in the EU and Japan." And then Professor Wall says, "Do you drive a Ford or a Chevy?" Um, I don't, but I wouldn't have a problem with driving a Ford or a Chevy. I mean, if I had a preference, I'd say, yeah, I want to drive a BMW. I want to drive a German car, but they're a little pricey. But I don't have a problem driving a Ford or a Chevy. I don't have a problem driving a Japanese car, a Honda or a Toyota. I mean, obviously, the the preference is I mean, a lot of countries. I mean, it's a national thing. I mean, why do the French? They drive French cars. It's part of their national identity. They drive their Citroens, um, and you're not going to get them to drive Fords and Chevys. You're not even going to get them to drive BMWs. So that's why I don't know how you can force people to purchase your products. Americans drive American cars. The British used to drive American cars. They used to like their Fords and their Chevys. You saw it all the time. Um, but so I think I don't know. It's very hard to force people to buy a product, and particularly cars. Cars are very much about national identity. It's part of your DNA, your national industry, and the auto industry is very much about who you are as a country. I mean, for the Germans, their BMWs and their Volkswagens and everything else, it's about who they are, and that they can't, they're just not going to let that go. Danaka says he will slap tariffs on Mercedes or BMW SUVs assembled in the US as well. I don't think he's going to do that. I think that's a good question. I think if you're he doesn't have a problem with foreigners investing in manufacturing jobs in the United States. So if the Mercedes or BMWs are produced in the United States, I think he doesn't have a problem with that. I think it's all about having jobs in the United States. So I think he's all for Mercedes and BMWs that are produced back in America. I think it's more importing the BMWs. That's what and of course he thinks that though he hasn't really talked much about that, he has spoken about the manipulation of the currencies, and he went on at Angela Merkel, but he didn't do much about it. The Angela Merkel, that essentially the Germans were manipulating the currency, that they were undervaluing the euro in order to make their cars unfairly competitive, and that was a function of the euro. So the euro was lower in value than it should be in order to make to price out American cars, and he would bring that up with Angela Merkel, and she would just ignore it. So, but that wasn't really a central part of his trade policy in the first term. I mean, he talks about it now. The Chinese are always devaluing their currency. They're always undercutting American products. He says this about the Japanese. The Japanese are always undervaluing their currency. But he didn't. But we'll see whether he does more with that whole issue with the currencies in his term. Jenny, very, very good to see you again. Thank you so much, Jenny. Really generous of you. Really good to see you. It's been a long time. And then Jenny says, not had my meds, so still awake, evening all. Well, I'm glad you're still awake. So, but really, thank you. It's been a long time. We used to really enjoy your scabrous wit. You always referring to, and in those days, Boris Johnson was still president, and no president, he was prime minister, and you would diligently refer to him as Blowjob Johnson. That was a very, very good. And I had, before you, Jenny, I'd never heard anyone referring to him as Blowjob Johnson. So I don't know whether you invented that, but I thought it was a excellent name. But anyway, thank you so much, Jenny. Really appreciate that. Marty, God, Marty has a picture. Is this Annalena Baerbock? So he's got a picture. That's as gruesome a sight as I've ever seen. A picture of Annalena Baerbock. With this new studio lighting, Marty says, how long will it be until George and Peter spend a hard-earned buddy bucks on makeup artists? Well, I don't know if that's ever going to happen, to be honest. I don't know. I take your point about the hard-earned buddy bucks and then no squandering, but I'm not into the whole makeup thing, particularly when you see what people look like, and you see it much more clearly on the computer screen rather than television, that they all wear vastly too much makeup. In fact, they look quite grotesque. They almost look like when people are dead and then they put out on display, and the mortician puts all this makeup on to make it look like you're still alive, lying peacefully there, and they put this grotesque amount of makeup. Well, that's what some of these people look like on television. They look like a mortician has absolutely caked makeup on. So I don't see us, to be honest, going very much in for makeup. Certainly I wouldn't. Anyway, let's take a look what it says about Annalena Baerbock. It says, German foreign minister and Green Party member Annalena Baerbock is coming under pressure after she gave a flippant answer. Oh, yeah, I saw this. She gave a flippant answer when asked about spending 136,000 euros of taxpayer money on a makeup artist. She said without it, under lights, she'd look as grave as a gravedigger. That was a grim thing. Yes, gray as a gravedigger. She does look pretty gray, but yeah. That's miss 360 degrees. And then Jenny says, save cash with the Homer Simpson makeup gun. Ooh, let's take a look at that. Homer Simpson makeup gun. So thank you for that. And then we go on. Denaki says, Michael Tracy highlighted the enthusiasm the crowd showed Nikki Haley after she endorsed Trump. I didn't see that he was that enthusiastic. I thought it was polite. It wasn't exactly uproarious. I mean, they were very enthusiastic about J.D. Vance, but I didn't think it was that excited about Haley. And Haley wasn't particularly warm about Trump. I mean, she endorsed him, but it was a somewhat begrudging endorsement. So, it was not, she said, well, I did it because the alternative is Biden. That's not exactly, very, very warm. You say, well, it's better than the alternative. So I didn't quite see. I mean, I saw that thing with Michael Tracy, but I didn't see that it was that enthusiastic. It was a little more enthusiastic for DeSantis, but and then anyway, Danaki says Strelkov transferred to a penal colony for former law enforcement in the middle of nowhere, so no front rehabilitation for him. Serves him right for posting all those pesky questions. Yeah, I find it very troubling. I really do. I think there's really no justification at any time for imprisoning people for what they say and what they write. Strelkov did nothing wrong. He, as you said, he raised all those questions about the SMO. Very good questions, and I don't see that the authorities are given any plausible answers to them. But nonetheless, they were just questions, and he should never have been arrested. He should never be in prison, and that applies to others. I mean, that applies to Boris Kagarlitsky. I mean, if somebody isn't posing any kind of a threat, he's not issuing any calls for violence, then I think there's no justification for it. Imprisoning and a penal colony. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't know where the penal colony is. Probably where it's probably brutally cold in the winter. No, I think it's just appalling. It's just there's just simply no justification for it at all. And again, people have said rightly criticisms of Navalny and so on, but my view on Navalny, whatever you can say about him, his past, and all the things he's written about it, how on earth could that justify 19 years? I mean, it's how could you justify 19 years in a penal colony for what? And then he dies. So it was and again here we got this so I don't know, it's yeah. But anyway, thank you for that. Professor Wall says, an off-the-wall movie recommendation for you here, George. Look into the film A Boy Named Charlie Brown from 1969. It looks like it's designed for kids, but it's actually got a very adult message of how the common people thrust into popular positions can be pushed around by others to their detriment. Rather a telling message for today. Okay, let me write this down so that I don't forget. It's A Boy Named Charlie Brown. A Boy Named... I don't know this film, so let me check this. But if there's any other things like that, because something, if you're going to think, I mean, as I say, I think Save the Tiger, Falling Down, I think there's a similar theme, but I think that there must be some movies like that about, good, decent, middle-class people, and they suddenly feel that the country has moved away from them. They kind of they're patriotic, and yet they're getting nothing at all out of the system, which they were expecting. James, and so then Mary Grossman says, mentioning BlackRock on DD Geopolitics, I believe showed the Trump shooter in a school setting as a commercial for teachers. Yeah, BlackRock pulled it. Yes, I saw that. I saw that as well. That was weird. He was in a commercial, BlackRock, and there he is sitting there, this nerdy schoolboy, listening intently to somebody giving a lecture, kind of a pep talk. Giving this BlackRock guy was giving a pep talk. Yeah, it was that was quite creepy. But again, he does look very nerdy, and I think somebody says he looks like a male version of Elizabeth Warren. So like, you know, a bit younger, but a kind of a male version. I mean, and so if you think of Elizabeth Warren, you know, take a few decades off her age, that's the kid. And so, um, Jenny says, "Okay, Melania, I'll hire a girl." Um, I don't quite follow that one, Jenny. Okay, Melania, I'll hire a girl. I don't know. So it's a little cryptic for me. UK is just about to release a load of inmates. Yeah, that's part of, I guess, the the new Labour. That always very nice, and then particularly what was appalling about the when what's her face Ivanka gave her that talk about we've done all this, the first step program, is then there was been a dramatic spike in violent crime in 2020. Now, you know, whether it was because of this first step program you're releasing, that's a different issue. But there was at that moment, while she was speaking, a violent spike, a substantial spike in violent crime. Now, if you're going to run on a platform, hey, we got to do something about the rising crime, particularly the rising violent crime, you can't very well then also boast about all these inmates that you're releasing. I mean, you got to make up your mind. Are you going to be the law and order president, or are you going to be the penal reformer president? So Ivanka gave absolutely the most catastrophic message at that moment when crime was spiraling out of control. Oh, isn't it amazing? You know, hey, we're so progressive. We're releasing prisoners en masse, and we've only just started. Anyway, Marty says seasonal affective disorder lamps. The nights are closing in. I got to get one of those things. I've been meaning to get one, that seasonal affective disorder lamp. But people say that they're quite effective. I've never seen one myself, but I know people think that they're really effective because nights are closing in, and they're closing in fast. It's horrific. So I got to get that. So Anne Marie says, yes, shitty games indeed. Also, the grandiose peace summit. I'm feeling so ashamed. Yeah, that's right. The peace summit in Switzerland. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Anne Marie. And then Danaki says, Ceausescu. See, it's funny. I wasn't expecting to talk about Ceausescu today. So yes, Ceausescu paid off the debt by April 1989 and finished the year with an extra $6 billion in exports and was dead by Christmas. Yeah. The 6 billion nowhere to be found. And now we have over 100 billion euros in foreign debt with not much to show for. Yes, very, very interesting. Isn't that interesting? That Ceausescu did this, and then there was the Americans clearly encouraged that brutal execution of Ceausescu. Americans were very happy about this. You know, that ridiculous show trial. I mean, it wasn't any kind of a trial. It just simply executed him and his wife. I mean, this is a sort of the savagery. Remember when they executed Mussolini? Okay, you execute Mussolini, but then they executed Mussolini's mistress. Well, what did she do? Yet they executed. Okay, well, great. That's it. They hanged him on the lamppost upside down, and then they hang her as well upside down. So it was a very brutal, horrific thing that they did, encouraged by the Americans. Gorbachev doubtless played his own shitty little role in that slaughter. And you're right to bring up that $6 billion that was nowhere to be found. You know, who walked off with that $6 billion? And Danaki says he was sold out by a security apparat. And then similar to what happened to Milosevic in 2000. But with Milosevic, it was touch and go whether he would be killed. I mean, the Americans wanted him executed in the way that Ceausescu was, but the military um, gave him a break. I mean, they pretty much said to him, if you step down, even though there was no need for him to step down, if you step down, you can avoid the Ceausescu fate, and then he stepped down. Again, it was gangland stuff because he shouldn't have stepped down. There was no need for him to step down, but they pretty much made it clear that they were just going to kill him if he didn't step down, which is what the Americans wanted. And then Danaki says, my personal theory, this is again about Ceausescu, my personal theory is he was the only commie leader executed as Gaddafi was executed as a warning for others to lay off these dangerous ideas of debt-free sovereignty and independence. He wanted to establish an alternative bank for the third world as an alternative to World Bank. No, I think that's right. I think it's the independent path, which is what Milosevic also wanted. I mean, Milosevic was pursued, again, independence, non-alignment, no to NATO, and then we'll have our own kind of socialist whatever system in Yugoslavia. Then they were never going to tolerate that. So yeah, very much what happened to him, Gaddafi, Milosevic. It was exactly the same. And then Mary Grossman says, Trump was upset when Harley Davidson motorcycle manufacturer left Wisconsin for Europe. The museum is still in Milwaukee. Yeah, that's right. He was very upset. Because again, Harley Davidson. That's as American as apple pie. So he was absolutely that's kind of the way he thinks. That somehow we have to save American jobs. And then Professor Wall says historian Warren Carroll says Elena Ceausescu was guilty of being involved in participating in certain abuses of the people of Romania while her husband was in power, and that was why the people also called her death as well as her husband's. I don't have any details other than that, but Carroll was an expert on Cold War and well researched in his details. I have my doubts about all of that. I mean, I just feel that there's always the tendency to go after these women, the wives of dictators, and to present the wives as being, the sort of the Lady Macbeth figures. They have their hands full of blood, and you see it all the time because they did that same thing with Milosevic and said, "Oh, the real evil person behind the scenes was his wife," And again, that's the Lady Macbeth syndrome. And and then again, you had this. Remember, with Mao Zedong, you had Madame Mao. Oh, Madame Mao, she was really the worst. So it's always have that. Now, I have my doubts that she was particularly involved in this. The communist systems were quite, were actually, there was a kind of delegation of power, a division of labor. The idea that you have this the evil woman, the evil witch who's doing all these terrible things. I think it's the stuff of tabloid journalism. I just have a lot of sympathy. I've heard too many of these types of stories. The real power behind the throne, the really bloodthirsty person is the wife. So that's I'm just a little skeptical of that. But anyway, it's thanks for pointing that out. Anyway, let's see if we can address a few things on YouTube before we depart. God. I've been so busy with locals. I've seen so many on so many comments on YouTube. This is the part that's really fun because the lettering is so tiny, and then I have to start squinting and look really awful. Anyway, is that it? Yeah. So anyway, we have so pom. I love this. Like Gunny 1972 says, "Hello, Peter," and then says, "Hello, George." Yeah. This is George. This is not Peter. My Rumble account says about the excellent interview by Trump on Bloomberg. I agree. I thought that was one of the Trump's better interviews. He actually got into the details of policy. Usually he leaves it at the level of generality, but here he got into the minutiae of policy and was saying things that were unusual. I mean, like talking about McKinley. That was very interesting. My Rumble account says Vance is a lower middle class bred American. We haven't had one of those near the levers of power in at least a generation. Yeah, I agree. I mean, Nixon obviously is similar. Bill Clinton had that as well. He also again came from a very poor background, and I guess like Vance, very ambitious, and so once he got into the an Ivy League college, he quickly became an Ivy League person, and adopted all the various urbane, charming manners of Ivy Leaguers. So yeah. I mean, I think that I mean, in the case of Vance is even more humble than Bill Clinton. Al Qaeda, I think, says Vance's grandma swears like a sailor, and his mother was a junkie. Yeah, that's right. I mean, but the mother is now clean, and he brought that up again. It's an amazing thing to say before the GOP convention, "Oh, my mother's been clean for 8 years" or something. I mean, it's amazing thing to say that about your mother. "Oh, she's been clean for 8 years," and I'm hoping that we'll celebrate, I think, 10 years of being clean in the White House. Mr. President, I hope you'll allow us to celebrate it in the White House. And so, okay, sure. But that's something. Again, Bill Clinton's mother was not a was not a junkie. I think she liked to gamble, but not a junkie. Anyway, let's see. Somebody brings up here Larry Kudlow. I have to say I'm very disappointed that Larry Kudlow is a part of Trump's economic advisors. He was one of his economic advisors in his first term, and then another one of his advisors is Arthur Laffer. I'm kind of I don't know, just that's going back to the Reagan. Both Laffer and Kudlow were Reagan insiders. So after all the talk about how Trump is leaving Reaganomics and the Reagan legacy, what the hell are we doing rehiring Laffer and Kudlow? Tesla Talk says, I want George to do an impression of Larry Kudlow. Larry Kudlow, the impression is very simple. I think we need tax cuts. I think the solution to America's problems is tax cuts. That's my impression. I mean, there's nothing distinct about his voice. There's only one thing: tax cuts. That's his solution to every problem. You open up his brain and you find the tax cuts written in it. That he's never had anything else to say other than that. So. So, as I say, I'm going to set up a live stream and a live chat at around, I guess it'll be 9 p.m. Central Time, which is 10 p.m. Eastern Time, middle of the night here, but so that people can watch, on locals, on our locals board, people can watch and offer their comments on what they think about Trump's speech. It'll be interesting. I mean, what tone he's going to take. Von der Leyen, Juni 1972, von der Leyen, von Thun und Taxis und von Hohenzollern, for example. Yeah, there's a lot of those families in Germany. An awful lot of them. All the funds. They never really quite got rid of them. Mr. Wonderful says, in 1948, the U.S. passed a law called the Smith-Mundt Act, which forbids the CIA to propagandize to the U.S. In 2013, the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act was passed that allowed it. Yeah. Hugh Keenan asks, Judge Napolitano's gang, Scott Ritter, Larry Johnson, etc., do they still have an audience? You tell me. I'm baffled. Anna Jackson says he gets plenty of views. They get plenty of views. I'm baffled. I don't see it, but I can't speak for others, and I don't get the taste for that. But different strokes for different folks. And Hugh Keenan says, Alistair Crook is excellent. All other judge guests are storytellers. Does his audience trust their bluster and bluff? I don't know. Again, you tell me. I mean, Ritter and Johnson, I mean, they've been consistently wrong. I mean, this has been going on for 2.5 years. And so I'm kind of, baffled why there's still an audience for that, and for their categorical assertions when that they've been wrong. So. Richard Phillips said, apropos the film Network, middle-aged man having an existential crisis. That's only one small theme of Network. I mean, I think we have had Network already. We've had a screening of. Did we have a screening of Network? Yeah, I think we've had a screening of Network. But I think that's much more about journalism and network news and so on. Good film, but I think the middle-aged man having an existential crisis is a subplot of the film. So I don't think that's really, it's not the center of the film. Richard Phillips says Crime and Punishment. I don't know whether you're thinking about, apropos of the film, again, middle-aged man having a crisis is, well, first of all, he's not middle-aged, but anyway, I'm not sure whether that's what you were referring to. But I think this the Charlie Brown film, I think that may be quite interesting. I'll look into that. Mr. Wonderful says, I remember when BLM were literally blackmailing businesses, forcing them to agree to give them protection money. Yeah, that's exactly what they were doing. Yeah. And then you had the Democrat politicians like Harris celebrating this. They're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. And they shouldn't stop. They're going to go on. And they're going to go on. They'll never stop. They will go on. Oh, God. And this, she thought was Tesla Talk says you would absolutely definitely not want a Ford or a Chevy. I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't have a problem necessarily. I mean, it wouldn't be my first preference. I mean, I don't know. For some reason, I just have this thing for German cars. I don't know. I guess it's some. I think I've always had for German manufacturing products. I always think that they are almost like the exemplar of excellence. But that's why I think if I had a preference, say yeah, I'm gonna get a BMW. I did have a Volkswagen, and that was a high quality product. It was a Volkswagen Beetle. Those Beetles, which were kind of interesting looking. I had a Volkswagen Beetle. It's a good car. But anyway, apropos of this film, I mean, I think that next week, I think we're still on the theme of the sales and advertising and marketing. So we had Glengarry Glen Ross, a very dark. It's a black comedy, but it's a very dark black comedy last Monday. And then I think from the last time I looked on the board, it looked like Tin Men is runner-up. Tin Men is also a dark comedy, but much more benign and gentle than Glengarry Glen Ross. But yeah, definitely a very dark film. But then after that, I want to, if we could do something like that, have a board on the question of if people can think of movie titles of It doesn't have to be middle-aged, young men, middle-aged men, but just somehow, doesn't even have to be men. But the feeling of disappointment of somebody, you've done everything right, and yet you've lost your country, you've lost your whole life, and you're trying to understand what happened, why you just surplus baggage. So if you can think about films along those along those lines, just put that down as a suggestion, and then we can do a poll, because at the moment we've only got two possible contenders, which is Save the Tiger and Falling Down. Both I think are good films. So, but if you can come up with something along those lines, that'd be great. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you, everybody who joined me. Thank you for all of your comments and suggestions. And thank you above all to those who put some money into the tip jar. It's very, very helpful. It's a real boost for us when we have that, and it makes everything worthwhile. It makes enables us to keep going and doing things and so on. So today, please join us for the live chat for Trump's speech, estimated 9 p.m. Central Time, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So please come along. Tell us what you think of Trump and the audience. So that should be a lot of fun. So we'll be back over the weekend. We'll do some more podcasts. We'll have a live stream next Monday, and then my own solo live stream on Tuesday. Thank you for tonight, and see you, I hope, in a few hours. All the best. Good night.